Hello and welcome back to the second part of our presentation, the second input we promised you in the last one. And now we are going to answer or try to answer the questions how educators actually help learners to overcome learning barriers. Before we start, if you didn't see our first input, we may present ourselves. My name is Eva Steinheimer. I'm a researcher at 3S in Vienna and the project coordinator of the Bridging Barriers project.
Hello from my side as well. My name is Günther Hefler. I'm also a researcher at 3S in Vienna, and I also contribute to this project as a senior researcher.
Good. So to dive into our subject again, I want to come back to the slide that you may already have seen if you watched the first part, and remind you and summarize a bit what we talked about, the typologies of challenges that are addressed in adult basic education as the starting point for our research. To summarize, again, if we think about the learner who enters an adult basic education course, maybe for a longer period of time with a high number of teaching units and with specific profile of learning needs, and also a profile of different challenges and maybe barriers that this learner will meet in the learning progress. We can think about what will improve the learner's progress and what will encourage him or her to stay in the course and not leave. And the basic is what we call kind of a package of different assets that have to be granted. So the course should provide a framework where the psychosocial needs of the participants are met. The course should also provide an appropriate way to make the learning immediately available in day-to-day life and have connection to the participants' day-to-day life. And the third part of this basic package is to provide the appropriate tasks that are not too easy and not too difficult at the same time, but support the participants' specific needs. So this is already a lot, but often in adult basic education, additional challenges arise and have to be met. And this is then rather specific barriers that each participant may face in the learning process. And for educators, this means that they have to, first of all, detect these difficulties. They have to reflect on what type of intervention may be helpful. They have to suggest appropriate exercises to overcome the difficulties, and in cooperation with the participant, really together with the participant, work on ways to overcome barriers, to work around barriers to be successful. And to make this process better understandable, we refer to the concept called deliberate practice, which we are going to present in the upcoming slides. The concept deliberate practice is strongly connected to the work of the Swedish psychologist Anders Ericsson, but maybe he was better known as Anders Ericsson, as he lived in the US for most of his academic life. His research interest was the source for developing expertise, becoming an expert, and he agreed with the fact that in practically any domain of professional experience, including also the performing arts, expert performance can do things completely out of the reach of lay people. However, he took an interest in reconstructing how these superior levels of expertise could be achieved in the first place, and how do experts acquire their advanced levels of skills was the predominant question. In his best known research, he started with the kind of obvious assumption that practice makes perfect, or for those of you who know German, Übung macht den Meister, which is not really translatable, was this first assumption. However, one can observe that more exercise, so more of the same kind of exercise, does not typically lead to higher levels of expertise. So in this this best known paper of Ericsson that you also find in the literature section in the back of this presentation, is based on a study where he followed students playing an instrument over longer stretches of time and measuring their efforts and also their progress made. And he found out that by investing more time in exercising alone, and the progress of the students often remained limited. So more hours of training did lead to poor outcome and considerable health problems, but not higher levels of expertise. Only by following the useful suggestions how to work around, for example, technical difficulty in a piece, they were able to make progress. So not the amount of hours spent on practice, but the effectiveness of the hints given and the readiness to give the recommendation a try and reflect on their outcome turned out to explain differences in the progress students were able to make. And in the following, we explain how we propose to relate these ideas to the field of adult basic education. Our idea to use the concept of deliberate practice starts with the observation that learners experience many tasks if they are facing highly complex problems in playing a particular sequence in a piece of music, for example. They can simply not do it. It is important to become sensitive for the brutal fact that they face difficulties where well-educated or more expertise musicians see hardly any problem. It also helps to see which active role the teacher can play in designing tailored ways to make progress. For this, he or she needs to assess the current situation and rely on his or her experience to make helpful suggestions. Moreover, the teacher needs to work together with the student so that together a way forward can be found.
In the following slide, we have tried to sum up again the key ideas about deliberate practice and how we are going to apply them to the field of adult basic education. We see learners with a certain level of skills, certain level of competences at the point struggling with a particular task, and we see that they are not able to overcome the difficulties involved in the particular task by using simply the more common approaches to deal with it. For example, by repeating it again and again, simply they cannot make progress. Next, we know that adult educators can draw on the experience how it might be possible for a learner to overcome the specific difficulties he or she is in, and how he or she can work around this particular learning barrier. We assume that the adult education practitioner evaluate the situation, get some ideas how the learner might be supported, then provide exercises, hints, solutions, negotiate with the learner how to apply this, let's say, solutions and how to practice on them, and then receive the feedback of the learner about the outcome of the strategies. And by this interactive process, together with the learner, the practitioner and the learner themselves might develop a strategy able to overcome the learning barrier, so that in the end, even not necessarily within a short period of time, the original problem could be solved and the task can finally be mastered. And for all of this, we say that this is already the core of what is going on in the adult basic education classroom, as all the participants are so in need for getting support in learning problems which have not been overcome at an earlier stage of the learning careers. It's clear that the learning difficulties themselves might fall into very different categories. So speaking of literacy, you can start with difficulties of combining certain sounds. It can be difficulties to read combinations of letters. It can be difficulties to grasp a particular pattern of grammar. With numeracy, there's of course a whole universe of possible problems, but also speaking of the ability to follow a course, to participate actively in a group, we might expect a lot of barriers which are linked to certain reasons, and also for these various other activities, the teachers might get an idea how to help the students to develop and to grow certain abilities so that he or she can actively participate in the course for long stretches of time and overcome the limitations faced for whatever reason they might cause to make it difficult, for example, to participate actively in a group environment. To summarize again the various pieces of the deliberate practice model, we suggest again to think through an example stemming from learning to play a music instrument, or learning to perform a particular piece on a music instrument, let's say, for example, the piano. Because by taking this example, it's very obvious how the deliberate practice might be also structured within the field of adult basic education. So when learning a piece, each learner typically encounter particular barriers where he or she is not able to play the piece through where he or she struggles. Observing teachers in this field give you an immediate idea of deliberate practice, because he or she will propose how to approach this particular piece, or how it might be possible to do an exercises on other piece which prepares you for mastering this particular section in the piece of interest. It's also clear that by this back and forth, learners grasp a lot of other practical tools to think through the difficulties and to become aware for the reason which make it difficult for them to master a particular sequence in a play. At the same time, by this back and forth process, the learner receive support by the teacher and get confident that in the end it might be able to play through the sequence and not to fail again in this particular aspect. And over time, even quite difficult sequences might be mastered without much difficulty. Similar process can be observed in any part of adult basic education, where at a certain moment something is very difficult to perform or even impossible, and then by suggesting tailored exercises which are either much more difficult but having other aspects, or which are much less difficult, and so that you can gain confidence and only slowly progressing to the really difficult part for the learner, you can try to overcome or to work around the difficulty, to also to reduce the attention for what is not possible at the moment, and put more attention on all the activities a learner can practically do, and the various occasions where he or she is successful in making progress. And over time, and by this interactive approach, the learner will more or less achieve a higher level of skill, and therefore be able to solve over time difficulties which are out of reach within a short time frame and without this specific help provided by the teacher. It's very important to remind that it's not the question of how much practice a learner is able to do, but whether or not he or she receives support in doing the right thing, so that really learning can be achieved in areas which are really highly difficult for the individual learner, even in cases where outsiders might not fully understand where the difficulties come from. It's also clear that, and this is our last point in this presentation, that we have expressed several times, that deliberate learning, the concept, also points to the fact that learning is a highly interpersonal experience. It's not so much something taking place within a person, but it's mainly something taking place between two persons at least, or within a group. Any deliberate practice, and I will give you this scheme we have tried to develop. Any deliberate practice is also interpersonal process, where a task is given by the teacher. At the same time, by giving the task, the practitioner observes the difficulties created by the task. He or she observes how the learner is doing with the task and reflect on how to support the learner. This means that in a certain way, he shares or she shares a field together with the learner, and the learner feels supported by this provision of reflection and support by the teacher. And this instills a high level of confidence on the side of the learner, and more importantly, by seeing the teacher thinking about the reason for the difficulties, he or she becomes aware about things which are not accessible in the first place. Only by seeing that the teacher is able to understand where the difficulties come from, he or she learns that there is a reason for the not being able to do something. And this means by understanding the reason also that you get confident that by proper technique, you can, in a certain way, find a solution for the task ahead. And thereby you are really expanding your conceptions on how learning is possible. And this is one of the key mechanisms behind deliberate practice, that you actually better understand how your learning will be structured in the future. And this allows you to see that a learning will be possible even in case that you experience severe difficulties to achieve it in a short range of time. You might also see that by this interpretation, we are already quite close to a psychoanalytic understanding of learning, inspired by the psychoanalyst Wilfried Bion, for example. And I think it's also important for us to see that this interpersonal level, of course, strengthens the importance of the teacher as a key resource for the learning. So it's effectively the case that the teacher in education adds to the resources available for the learning by making this interrelationship, by this interpersonal experience possible for the learner. This is the final argument we would like to add. We are very interested in your personal and your group's reflections on the usefulness of the concept of deliberate practice for understanding what's going on in the adult education or the adult basic education classroom. And we are looking forward to receiving your feedback. For today, it's the end of our presentation. We thank you very much for your attention and say goodbye, and looking forward to hear from you in any future occasion. Bye.
Bye.